Welcome to the Audiobook Lovin Podcast, discussing all things audiobooks with the authors that write the stories and the narrators that perform them. Brought to you by Viviana, Enchantress of Books.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Season 5, Episode 22 of the Audiobook Lovin Podcast. Today, I am chatting with narrator Blanca Frappier. Thank you for being here.
Hi, it's so nice to be here.
Why don't we start by having you tell us a little bit about yourself, how long you've been narrating, and how you got started?
Yeah. So I'm autistic. And when I was younger, I started getting like report cards and stuff where it was like, Blanca's a little different. She's always singing or acting out movie scenes in class, and she's being very disruptive, but like she's not like mean disruptive. So they were trying to figure out what to like do with me. And so my mom decided, since I would just quote movies over and over and over again, like all different scenes and just act out movies, she was like, well, let's get her into theater. And she was a little worried because depending on how your autism shows, different things can be different triggers. And so she was a little worried to put me in theater, just throwing me in. But it turned out that because I was also very, very shy, I had a stutter, I had a lisp, I had a speech impediment, and I was painfully shy. And so when she put me in theater, she was like, okay, this is either going to traumatize her or she's going to love it. Luckily enough, I ended up finding my people in theater because you could just go and act out silly scenes and people actually were like, cool, next take. So I ended up loving theater, did theater my entire life, musical theater. I went to San Francisco State University for theater. And then after I got some jobs there in theater, I was like, well, you kind of hit that point where you're like, well, do I want to keep going to college for theater or do I want to all of a sudden pursue, and then I went straight into like oceanography and climatology, which is like the opposite thing.
Yeah.
So I did that for a while. I paid for college doing like the acting and some modeling and stuff. And I became a stay-at-home mom, and rehearsals weren't possible. It's just not possible to be there, at early hours, late hours when you have kids who are also, I have a big age gap in my kids. And so it was like when my son was younger, I was, doing like the aquatics coordinating thing. And finally me and my husband were like, okay, we're going to stop and we're going to have you be a stay-at-home mom. And I have severe PCOS, so I thought I couldn't have kids. So when we found out I was pregnant, it was immediately like, okay, that's what I want to do. So I kind of walked away from theater, acting, singing, all of it to be a mom. And I would do it again. I don't regret that at all, because now I have a bunch of little minions who follow me around and do movie quotes with me.
Right.
And we get to embarrass my husband everywhere. It's awesome.
Goals.
Yeah. He'll see the look in their eyes and he's like, don't you dare break out into song. I'm like, oh. And so during the pandemic, I had just gotten offered to do an audiobook, and then the pandemic hit and there was like daycare. There was no daycare. So I started recording at like 4 a.m. and found that was like my best time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I still do that. And what was it? Gosh, a year and a half ago, and so when I say I audiobook narrate, it's a hobby to me, but not in the sense of like professionalism. So I do it in a professional manner. But time-wise, it's like I only have like 2 to 3 hours, like 4 days a week to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's like, oh, this is a really fun hobby. And I like to kind of treat it that way when it comes to my time. So I do like to work one-on-one with the authors. And that's kind of put me in a nice, fun situation where on TikTok, it's more like a fun activity versus like pushing to work, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
the survival
absolutely.
mentality isn't there, which is so nice because most of my life I grew up in poverty and, survival mode.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I got into audiobook recording because I wanted to be able to be at home with my kids. But I did notice, like, if you're a creative person and you don't have that outlet, you kind of start dimming or fading, I guess.
Yeah.
And so it just everything started getting very gray and kind of monotonous. And I loved my family time, but I didn't feel like I was me anymore. So we turned a closet into a studio and I talked to myself for hours.
And I think I saw one of your TikToks or one of your videos was saying how your husband's on the other side of the door snoring.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's admirable. My mom was an at-home mom too. And as the child, I appreciated her so much because I was able to do a lot of things because she was around. And other times where even when I was growing up, I was sometimes like, oh, Mom, don't go to that field. I remember her telling her one time not to do a field trip with me. And I felt so bad afterwards. I mean, I was still traumatized years later, and to this day, she passed away 4 years ago. And it's those little things that you're going, oh my God, to have been fortunate and lucky to have my mom at times where in the moment we're like, damn it, mom, she's always around. But later you're like, yeah. So I'm glad that you're able to do that with your kids. And I love that you guys break out into songs. Do you guys have a particular song that you guys are like, do you guys like all look at each other and go, and then start? Like, how does that work?
Kind of. Yeah. So it'll be like, we'll be walking around and somebody will be like, hey, can you, and they'll say a word that kind of triggers like a memory. And all of a sudden I'll be like, skibbity, skibbity, skibbity. And then all of a sudden we go into like the skibbity toilet song or whatever. Or like musicals will break out into, and my husband will just, he used to like walk off and he'd be like so embarrassed. He would just walk off. Now he'll just smile and nod at people. And he's like, yep, that's actually happening. Yep.
Well, I mean, they did an entire show where in her head, they would break out into song and dance. So maybe you guys are onto something, as a family. Yeah, I probably would bust out with the camera and as if I'm like, yeah, I'm the recorder. This is just what we do. And just fun. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I got it from my sister because it was like a comfort thing for me growing up. She was I call her my little hero because as I said, I was painfully shy. And so I would never ask for food. I think one time we were at a friend's house, we were staying the weekend because my mom was out of town and I was too scared to ask for food. When we'd sit down and eat dinner and then I would just eat a little bit and then I'd be like embarrassed. I don't know, had a weird thing about food where I'm embarrassed to eat other people's food. And so my sister would always be like, you need to eat. And one time I fainted because I wasn't eating enough. And she was like, okay. And she would stand up for me and be like, you have to ask for food. And I'm like, I can't open my mouth. It won't come out. Like, I'm so scared. I freeze. So she would walk around and ask for things or like, like the Easter egg, like on Sunday, they'd throw you out there with all the other kids and it was like Hunger Games. She would always have the fullest basket ever because she would just tackle people and take the eggs. And I would be like reaching for an egg and see someone like look at the egg and I'd be like, oh, no, you can have it. It's fine. I didn't want that egg anyways. So I would have 0 eggs and her basket would be full. And she was the kind of sister who would dump half her basket in mine. And she was like that in all areas of my life. And so like we'd be at restaurants and we'd just start quoting movies. She'd see me start talking in movies, which is something that I still do where all of a sudden I'll respond with a quote from a movie instead of with my own words because I feel like it's like Bumblebee from Transformers where sometimes my brain doesn't think of what to say. But a different character's voice will be like, oh, and I'll say it in that character voice. And people would just look at me like, did you really just like talk like a beaver? Like, what the heck is that about? And she would, instead of making me feel alone or embarrassed, she would jump right in and start quoting the movie too. So I think that's kind of where we got it. And so I'm lucky enough to where my husband puts up with it.
Well, I mean, they're not worthy of your time if they're not willing to put up with our idiosyncrasies, or because it's who we are. I too will not ask for things. And I did, flat out blame my mom one time to her face. I go, Mom, it's always your fault that I cannot go up to like a Burger King or a restaurant and ask for like ketchup because she always kind of did it for us because, she was always taking care of us. And so I would go without, like, I would be fine. Like, okay, I wanted mustard and ketchup on my burger and they didn't add it. I'm like, okay, fine. I'll eat it without it. And I'm like, well, you can go get ketchup. Nope, I'm good. Don't make me.
I don't need it. I like it dry.
I'm like, it's fine. It's just so yummy in this way. As I got older, because my sister would be like, oh, Viviana will grab my hand and walk me up there and like, look at me. And I'm going, not saying a word. And she's like, can we please have some ketchup and mustard? Thank you.
But they always have to yell it out. And you're like, come on.
Like, stop. Yeah. And she's older by a minute because she's my twin.
Oh.
Yeah. So there's moments like that I'm like, yes, I totally feel you. Not asking for things and just being like, you know what, I will do without and suffer the consequences, as they may be.
So I grew up in Brewster, Washington, which is a very, very impoverished, like orchard picking town. And my mom came from the kind of like very, very poor white side of town where it was like they came here back in the pioneer days and they worked real hard. And she was like, so my mom came from that kind of a poor background. And my dad came from Michoacan, Mexico. He came up here and when he was about 18 on a work visa. And they met sitting down because my mom is 5'9" and he is 5'3". And they legit like met at a party sitting. And because my mom got pregnant with him, her family was extremely, extremely racist. And so when we went to my mom's house, we weren't allowed to eat their food. She would make a separate thing of food that we were allowed to eat. And she'd give us like one little scoop of whatever it was. And then she was like, you're not allowed to have the turkey or the stuffing or the this, because she would call us very racial names. Then she would make us sleep on the porch. We weren't allowed to sleep in the house or play with my cousin's toys. And so like things like Christmas, we would watch my cousin open gifts, but we didn't get any. And it was just kind of growing up that way. We were told we weren't allowed to ask for things because it was an inconvenience, or because, like they would laugh if we asked for stuff. Like they would call us like dirty, ugly apes. And we weren't, like, their food wasn't for us, that we had to go find our own food. I did actually, whenever we went to my grandma's house, we grew up like we'd walk down to the river and walk up and down the river, like hunting for berries and stuff like that. So I lived on a lot of like blackberries and whatnot. So I think that's where it comes from. Like, I don't like asking for things because I automatically start feeling like, oh, people, I don't want to bother people. And I think it's also the same reason why I don't approach people like at cons. I don't stand up and like say hi to people or go walk up to people. And it's not because, and I think I might come off as snobby, but really I'm always, my first instinct is in my brain. My brain says like, they don't want to talk to you. And so I've been working through a lot of that. But I think, I would rather go without ketchup at someone's house than be like, can I use your ketchup, sir?
Well, I am so sorry that you had those experiences growing up. And also, I mean, like, isn't it interesting how we're like, you feel and think that someone might think that you're being snobbish because you're not going up to them and saying hi. And you're in your head, you're also thinking that, you're not worthy or they're not going to want to talk to you. And so you're kind of totally second guessing in the opposite side. And it's nuts how we mess with our own mental states. And try to second guess ourselves. So I'm glad that you're working through that. It is a lot. It's a lot to go through. And on that, I'm so sorry. It just sucks. It breaks my heart to hear that, because I haven't experienced a lot of that racism, because also I'm like first generation American. My mom was from Chile and my dad was from Cuba. But I have, gone through the I'm not American enough and I'm not Latin enough for a lot of people. And I'm like, really? I can tell you off in Spanish and in English if you like.
Yep.
And so it's been, I've seen some of my friends go through some of the stuff like you went through. They're not, some of the family members don't accept them, or even neighborhoods and stuff like that. It's just, I really hope that as we continue to grow as as human beings, that becomes a lot less. And, because it's going to be hard to get rid of it because, people, that's the sad part because of people. But I'm hoping that as we continue to grow and stuff as human beings, we will be better.
Right.
Yeah. Do you speak Spanish and do your kids speak Spanish?
No. So continuing on like the kind of dynamic that town had, half the town was like the people who picked the orchards and half the town was the people who owned the orchards. And so my dad would not allow us to speak Spanish because he wanted to learn English. So because my mom spoke Spanish and English, she would translate for us. So she would speak English and then speak Spanish to him. So we heard Spanish every day, all day. And, the culture there was a lot of like multifamily homes. So it would be like one apartment or one orchard house to like 3 families. So it was always like, culturally, there was always like food and, like the community. And I was surrounded by the language, but I wasn't allowed to speak it. And so I can understand when people are talking, but I can't speak it back because my brain just doesn't pull the words out. And so that was one of those, like, for the book I just did, Theirs to Claim, the author really wanted to have the main character, because it was mostly her point of view. She wanted her to actually be somebody who was, Mexican American. When she reached out to me, she was like, you're the first person I found that can do different characters, different accents, guy voices, but also you're the same background as my main character. And I want to have respect for that community. And I was like, I don't speak Spanish. And it was like one of those Selena moments where it was like, I don't speak Spanish. But I actually did have speech therapy to get rid of a Spanish accent, which is kind of funny because, if you grow up hearing people say like Pepsi instead of Pepsi, you think that's actually the way it's said.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I gave her some samples. We worked really closely together. And then I called my cousins because they grew up in a different area than me. They grew up in like the Seattle area.
Mm-hmm.
And so inner city, everyone spoke Spanish, and it's not, you can find pockets where nobody speaks English. So she grew up with that background. So she was helping me with my Spanish. And, you know, they've always teased me when I say something. They're like, oh, no, try again. Yeah. And so for me, it was kind of scary. I was like, you know, at that moment where you're like, am I Mexican enough to do this respectfully and right? And, you know, I talked to my cousins and I talked to some people. We had sensitivity readers and listeners who, you know, listened through and were like, oh yeah, no, you're doing just fine. And, you know, you are part of the community. And so I think it's something that like blended people feel a lot, is that we aren't enough of one and the other.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it's, and cause like with your dad and stuff, in my house, it was English outside the house and Spanish inside the house, because my grandmother lived with us. And she did not know English, except my brother did teach her how to say motherfucker and microwave. There's like an 80-something-year-old going, motherfucker, motherfucker. like mama. But it was just, you know, but that's as far as like, it was just, you know, communications, and I know about the food, but culturally, like I'm not like, I don't know any of the famous poets or who the writers are or political stuff. I mean, I know, you know, Cuba bad because of communism and then, but of course the food I'm good at,
right?
You know, yeah. But I like I said, it's been interesting because you're never enough of one or the other, and you have a bit of that imposter syndrome when you're asked about, you know, how to pronounce something, or if you're, you know, can you speak on this if you haven't experienced something. I'm like, well, no, maybe not exactly that, but I've experienced this instead. But yeah, but it's an interesting language where one word means one thing in one community and, you know, location, and means the exact same opposite in another, because a straw is never just a straw.
Right. Yeah. So one of the funny, my biggest pickups that I had to go back and do are where I'm from in Washington. We don't say cabron with a B. We say cabron with a V.
Okay.
And I looked it up online, and I found literally like within the same sentence, different people from like Hispanics from Texas or from Florida or from Washington or California, they would say it both ways within this like manner of like 2 minutes. Yeah. And I was like, I'm like, okay, so am I right or am I wrong? Like, you know, I want to say it right for the California area because the character is from California. And so my cousin was like, I think you're saying it right. So when I did pickups, I had one sensitivity reader say like, no, it has to be with the hard B, cabron. And the other person was like, no, it has to be like a blended VB sound, right? And so if you listen to the book, you'll hear it all different ways on purpose, just because it's like, I'm like, 1 minute I'm saying it faster and I'm like, cabron. And the other minute I'm like, cabron. And the other minute I'm like insecure and like, cabron. I had to do a bunch of different pickups.
Yeah. But it is true. I mean, like, I think sometimes we forget that when it's from a dialect of a different, and it will even, I mean, think about it, even the word fuck, we go, fuck. You know, it sounds a little different depending on where you emphasize the act, you know, the heaviness of it all. And cabron, like I actually just, when you were saying it, I'm going, wait, and internally as I'm listening to you, I'm going, wait, do I go cabron or do I go cabron? And I'm like, I do both.
Yeah.
You know, and it depends on, like, oh, cabron, you know, and I think it just depends on where you put your tongue and your teeth. Again, we're getting, you know, more logistics here but you guys do this all the time with like the different accents. I love it when you guys say, oh, this accent lives in the back of my throat and this other accent lives in the front of my throat. And I'm going, huh? Like my tongue's just there. Where do I put it? But yeah. And literally I was listening to you. I'm going, cabron. I'm like, no, I do both. Yeah. So you're right.
Yeah, I made the mistake of practicing. I was in my own world washing dishes and I was saying it over and over. And my son walks up behind me and he's like, cabron. I'm like, oh, nope, you're like thick. Please don't say that. Like, don't say that.
Yeah. And then you get into the little nitty details where in some communities and cultures, that's just like saying dude. And in others, it's like saying like an insult, like don't be an asshole.
Yep.
In some cases. And you're going, yeah. Being born and raised in Miami, I had to figure out who was around me to figure out what word can be used for when, because I was like, well, if this word means bug in these islands in this country, but it means vagina in these other ones. And so I'm like, okay. So yeah, the bug.
Right.
But, you also said that this was like a hobby, and then you were very big about, but like, take it professional. And I understand that too. But really what you are is a part-time narrator.
Yeah.
When you have conversations, or have you had conversations with other narrators that are full-time, does that look a little different for you being part-time? As far as, aside from the scheduling, does it look differently or not for you?
Yeah, I think it does. So like for me, I'm more negotiable on my rates just because it's, and like my mentality was like, when I first started getting started, I canceled my gym membership so that money would instead go to studio equipment, right? And cons, like going to events or paying for merch and whatnot, like giving out boxes and stuff. So for me, it was like, I'm paying for a hobby like I would if I was going to go rock climbing or a yoga class. And so I cut all these things out so that I could pay for merch and stuff. And some people would be like, oh, well, that's called business starting. Like that's starting a business. And, afterwards I was like, oh yeah, I guess, if I would have handled it more like I was starting a business instead of doing something I wanted to as a love or a passion, I probably would have written down everything I was spending. And then as far as like booking goes, I let authors know, like, I can't record a book in a week. It takes me like 2 to 3 months to record a book. And then I do my own editing and like the mastering and whatnot. And so for me, that takes like a good, 3 months per project is what I try and schedule. And so far, the authors are perfectly fine with that. They like being able to work straight with me. And so, like if you work with a production company, sometimes you don't get to talk to the author when you come to a part where it's like, this sentence could have a completely different meaning if I say it this way versus this way. And so I always let my authors have a director's cut, is what I call it, where I upload the audio as I'm going into like a Google Drive where they can listen to it as I'm recording it, so that they can come back and be like, hey, this sentence, can you cry when you say this? Or can you say this with a little more like, I think one of the biggest things I had from one author was I didn't have enough anger or mad sound. And so we got on a live, or we had like a video chat, and she was like, nope, say a sentence again, but like, I need you really, really bitchy. And I was like, okay, I can do this. Like I can be snobby. And so like the 5th take, she was like, oh yeah, you sound like someone I would absolutely not like. And I was like, so being able to like work as like a collaborative is something different than I think when you're working with companies, just for the time consumption. So I always like feel bad saying that as a business person, because then other narrators, I feel like it's almost unfair because they're doing fabulous jobs. They're working so hard and they might not have the ability to talk to the author. So I never want anybody to be like, oh, well, why don't other narrators do that? And I'm like, well, because it's not actually like a business standard, if that makes sense. And so it's just like my rate. I was messaged by a couple narrators and they're like, Blanca, you can't post your rate so low because it's bad for industry standards. And I was like, oh, but I'm not doing it for the money. I'm doing it as a hobby. And they're like, yeah, but you still have to put your rates on your website as at least as this. And I was like, oh, okay. That was something I had to do differently, was the way I advertise a rate. And so I put negotiable on the end of it is how I was advised to do it. The other thing I do differently, I think, is like when I go to cons, it's not so much to like sell myself. It's more because being in a closet all by yourself can get kind of lonely. And so sometimes getting out and meeting people and making a community, having people that you can like jump on their lives and in the comment section kind of run amok and have fun with, that to me is like more what the my TikTok is about, and going to events is about, is getting to know the people that you work with. Because yeah, it's I guess theater is very, very, very close knit. We become family. At the end of a theater production, you have a huge party and people are crying and hugging, and you're like your family. And you might see each other over and over and throughout productions because you use the same theater company, right? But when it comes to narration, you're all alone in a booth, and you might do some live recordings with people or have like a launch party. But for the most part, you're just alone. So yeah, I think that that's one different way I handle my time is instead of focusing on like putting out books, I focus on like, for that 3 months, I'm going to get to know this community and the author and kind of know what they're following wants from this book, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And I think that sometimes we kind of look at things like this is why I'm not starting epoxy. I have not touched anything to do with epoxy. I know people have been hearing about this for a little bit, and it's also a reminder for myself because I can't do anything like a hobby, in the past 15, 20 years that I don't end up having like a store for, or I shop, I become a vendor to some other people's stuff. And I'm going, yeah, that's how this started. And that's how that started. And I end up having a business, which is again, why I'm not touching epoxy. Though I seen some really pretty trays lately and I'm like, I want to try. I'm like, no, I'll just buy it. I'm not touching the stuff. But a lot of times, sometimes people do stuff into it. And I think it gets sometimes a bit of that negative connotation when we hear hobby, as if we don't take it serious and, very nonchalant about it. Like if it's done, it's done. And so I've seen sometimes with vendors, like when it comes down to like physical stuff, that, some things might be done a little half-assed. And then, that things are not done to, they don't reply back. And I'm like, this is very unprofessional. And I've had people say, well, because it's not a business for us, it's a hobby. I'm like, well, see, the moment you have a website and you're having to, you become a business. And I've had to have this conversation with authors and narrators about you are your brand, you are your business. Now your business hours, that is on you, which in your case, you're part-time. And so I think it's really cool too, to see it, because sometimes I think you have a bit more of that flexibility where you get to pick and choose your projects. I love that you're able to have these conversations with the authors and that they're being nice about it too, versus being like, yeah, no, I'm like, not you. And it's just, I think sometimes we can, like, we as listeners, we can say, did they not research that part of the book? Did they not, the pronunciations? I mean, like stuff like that, where it's one thing to Google it and have it say Kissimmee versus someone from here that goes, yeah, it's Kissimmee, not Kissimmee or Kissimmee, whatever. And it's like Miami, it's not Miami. So I think it's pretty cool and I love it. And you've been going to conventions. So I know that Dark Star Con is happening, like we were talking about at the end of the summer. What else are you going to? Are you going to anything before that for this year?
Yeah, so I will be doing, I think Dark Star kicks off the whole season. So I think it's Dark Star, and then I have Books and Beaches in Oregon, and then I'm doing Bookish Babes Retreat, and that one's like purely just for fun. I will be doing like the narration by the firelight, and I think that we are going to be, so they're doing like LARPing, like a huge LARPing session. And me, Henry Kramer, and a couple other people are going to be the oracles. So we get to step out on the field and do like a super dramatic, theatrical, like intro into the battle and wish our warriors well. So that's going to be a lot of fun. But then the rest of the time we get to just run free. And there's like water obstacle courses, horseback riding, sword fighting lessons. I mean, zip lining. It's going to be this huge like camp for book nerds. Yeah, so I'm super excited about that one. And then there's what's after that one? Then after that one is Sinful Signings. And that one was a fun one. That was one of my very first ones I ever did, where I literally, as I told you, I froze like a goat and I would just sit there and like stare at people. And then they were nice enough to where they kind of knew me from the Books and Beer live interview show that we do, where they were like, okay, Blanca, retake, ready, go. And I'd be like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Let's try this again. And they were just really nice about that. And they knew that sometimes I glitch and I say the same like word over and over again. And so they were just really nice about just like the human aspect of like, like sometimes when you go to these conventions, people think that you're a persona.
Or you're a character from the book. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. And I'm like, no, I wish I could be as awesome as the characters in the book, but no, I'm actually really nerdy and awkward. And so that one's going to be a lot of fun. That's like you're more of the dark fantasy and kind of that aspect of books for Sinful Signings. And that's in Roanoke, Virginia. And then I have Booked in Chaos in South Carolina, I think is where it is.
Wow, girl, you got a bunch of stuff going on, which is good. It's good. I want to be able to do more stuff. And that's what I'm looking for 2025. I want to do some of the smaller venues. Because like you're here mentioning about going on these retreats where you're going LARPing and and sword fight. I'm going, wait a minute, hold on. Yeah. But you cannot go to New Orleans and not do something at a cemetery or do a ghost tour. I mean, one of those two things you've got to do besides eating beignets, so long as you're not like, glucose intolerance or sugar intolerance, there's other stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I did. I went to New Orleans for the Anne Rice Vampire Ball, which was one of the first things my husband did with me. And it was the funniest thing to see because he's like a computer nerd and a video game nerd. He's from a very small town and he's not used to like people that are extra. And so we went there and at first he was like, "Are you sure we should be like dressing up like this much?" And I was like, "Oh, trust me, trust me." So we get there and he walks around. He's surrounded by full on theatrical costumes and vampires and people that were very, very into their character and would not drop character, which for me was like, "Oh my gosh, that's epic." And he just looked so shell shocked. He was just, you could tell he was like, "I don't know what's happening," but he's loosened up a lot and I think he's going to do much better. But yeah, New Orleans is like, you have to go to like the vampire tours, the ghost tours, and then like Marie Laveau.
Yeah, Marie Laveau. Yeah. Yeah. There's actually a restaurant in New Orleans funny. I think I mentioned something on my Facebook feed with New Orleans and then I started getting one or two hits, but specifically this restaurant kept on coming out and they had like drinks in blood bags and it's very very, vampire themed. And come to find out they have a secret speakeasy in there too, where you have to have, I know. And I'm going, okay. So I'm trying to figure out, I'm like, because I got to get some of my girls and some of my boys together to go do the speakeasy, or a ghost tour or a cemetery tour. I mean, whatever. I'm open. This is going to be the third or fourth time. It's really bad that I'm not trying to remember the names, but at the times rather. But it's always been a fun city for stuff like that. And when you get together with friends, even if you've only talked online, it's just a little different than when you go sometimes with the family and you have that one, child of yours is giving you the eye, like, why are we here? This is so boring. And I'm going, no, they're talking about ghosts and things that go kaboom in the night. I mean, and so to be able to go with friends and have fun would be interesting. And also a lot of books are that's the backdrop for a lot of the books, especially for paranormal stuff. And there's been so many books that I've read and I'm going, hey, see that corner. Yeah, that was the bar at So-So's. And that was the other place in Sharon Kenyon's book series and this and that. And then, so it's going to be fun and exciting. What are you looking forward to in the most?
I think meeting all of the narrators, because, I work and I watch lives and I always feel nervous jumping into the live because I feel like I'm interrupting. If that makes sense. Then I'm like, oh, I don't want to ruin their flow if they're narrating or if they're like in a chat. And so like, it's cool to see people's personalities. And a few times I've jumped in and just like hung out in the comments and it's been fun to like get to know people, but to be able to like meet them in person and just kind of have a more relaxed conversation. And, as I said, building the community is really big for me. And, they were talking about doing tattoos there and I was like, heck yeah, I want to have like a back tattoo that's like all my bookish stuff to where every con I go to, they just add like a tiny little dragon or like a little dark star or just little pieces. Because when I'm 100, I better have a very wrinkly tapestry.
Or I can see you sitting down and with the grandkids saying, all right, folks, come up for story time.
Yeah, exactly.
Some people don't get it. I mean, when it comes to some of these events, even when it's just a traditional regular signing, some of them have themed parties. And I've known people that have gone to theater, like where the theaters get their costumes for things. Because sometimes they have rentals out, which is also how they make some of that money. And they have gone out and full blown rented complete outfits based on the theme. And I'm going, yes, go for it.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I love it. So it's going to be fun. Well, we're going to be doing a couple of little games here where I love it because I get to know you a little bit better, not just by your answer, but how you go about answering things. And also the readers and the listeners will end up getting to know you a little bit better. So when you go to the cons, you're going to be like, oh my God, that thing that we talked about, that you guys talked about, me too. And it just starts great conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to do the 2 truths and a lie where you tell us 3 things about yourself. And we're going to try to figure out which one's the lie. So what are your 3 things?
Okay. So I love snowboarding and winter sports. I lifeguarded beaches and rivers and pools for 23 years. And I was a Disney princess in Disneyland.
Oh my goodness. Again, on the details, you could have done lifeguard not for 22 odd years. You may love all the snow, winter sports, but not snowboarding. And also the Disney stuff. You could have been a princess, but at the wrong park. Girl, right? You did good. Okay, so which one's the lie? Was the lifeguard the lie?
Nope. I'll be 40 this year. So I've been like in aquatics for a long, long.
See, I was thinking like there's no way that you're old enough. 20 years. Yeah, that's right. Because you did do the marine biological degree and stuff like that. I wanted to be a marine biologist when I was a kid. Then I realized all the science and the math I had to go along with, and I went, nope. That's
exactly. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, but I want to, play with dolphins. I'm like, nope. All right. So we have either the love snowboarding and other winters or the Disney princess. I kind of want the Disney princess to be true, but I also kind of think that might be the lie. Is it the lie?
Nope. I actually was a Disney princess when I first graduated high school. I left right away, like the day after graduation. I drove to California and had like $25 to my name. And I went job hunting and tried everything and ended up running out of money, living out of my car. And I literally had to like eat food. Like if someone left their sandwich at a restaurant, I had to. I was getting to the point where I was like, I am going to have to like go home if I don't make this work.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah. And then one lucky day, I heard that there was auditions for the Disney stuff. So I was there all day long waiting in line. They measure you because you have to be in between a certain height. And you do some scenes and acting, and then they move you to the next phase. And it's all within one day. And then like you sit there for a couple hours and then all of a sudden you're on stage and they'll just tell you randomly to sing. And so it was like a really fun ordeal. And then all of a sudden I got the notification that I was a Disney princess, which you then find out all about like the backstage cast and the secret tunnels and the fact that like those animals that are with the Disney princesses are actually bodyguards because people like to hug and touch.
Yes. Or they go, yeah, you have the Disney, like, because I think you guys also have to say that like you were not Belle, you were friends with Belle.
Yep.
Yeah, for an example.
Yeah, so when I talk to like kids and stuff, I'm like, oh, I knew a Disney princess. I was friends with her. And then when people ask, like, what do you do? I'm like, I was a cast member.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did 16 years with the mouse here in Florida.
Oh,
yeah,
that's awesome.
It is. Yeah, it was really good. I learned a lot, good and bad, especially in my department as I was in HR.
Oh, yeah, so you got to hear it all.
I did, but mostly I was in HR. So wow, a lot of people always had so you hiring? I'm like, no, not that department in HR, because the company is so large. HR becomes an umbrella term, and you have the different segments underneath it. Like hiring is casting, ER was you did something bad and things like that. I was a lot more on the business management and starting ups. Like I was one of a project that I was on was closing Disney Springs and adding stuff to Disney Springs, and because it used to be Pleasure Islands here in Florida, and some of the other fun hotels and things like that. But I also got to see some of the casting, like getting hired and stuff, and some of those. Like at Animal Kingdom, the show for The Lion King was so fantastic, and the performance and stuff like that. So I kind of got to see that other side of the performance side of that's where I'm like, oh yeah, so you're friends with so and so, and I'm like, yeah, that's code for that was their role, and they were the Cinderella or they were Aladdin and stuff like that, and it's like, okay, cool, but yeah, bodyguards sadly needed.
Yep.
Yeah. So can you share who you were friends with?
I was friends with Jasmine, like outside the like her cantina thing, waving, smiling, that. And then one time only, I was able to be friends on stage and sing. So that was fun. And that I was also Jasmine.
Nice. Mm-hmm. I can totally see that. Did you do the whole wave thing?
Yes.
Because all the princesses had different ways and their friends had to learn it.
So they know that I was friends. So it's like, as you said, it's like one of those things where like, because we go to Disney World every once in a while. And so for them, they know about actors and actresses and whatnot. But I still have that nerdy side of me where I want the magic to be as real as possible.
Yes.
So like when we go to like things like Renaissance Festival, like one time, one of my friends was a mermaid for Renaissance Festival. So she had the silicone tail. And so we told her that the magician granted her a wish to be a mermaid for a day. So then we got to go through the portal where we went to the elf world, and then we got to see her. Because I just don't want to ruin magic for them. Like there's only a small window of time where the magic is real. And then the rest of your life you spend having that magic giving to others, right? So when we go there, they don't know that I was like close friends with the Disney princess. Mm-hmm. They know that I worked in the park and I got to know everyone. And that's just because when we go there, to see the looks on their faces when, they go and they meet Jasmine and Aladdin, and, they're telling them about like, oh, you're from Minnesota. Well, we don't get snow very often. Make me a snowball the next time. Like the cute things they say, the kids really fully believe it.
Yes.
And so like my oldest son, now he knows, like he's 16. And so he knows now, but like my 6 and my 9-year-old, they both don't know, just because we're going again this coming summer. And I'm like, I just want to see that look in their eyes. It's just like, so, I don't know, magical.
Same thing. Like when I used to tag my friends and family, and I knew some of the stuff that was going on as far as what was going to be there or what was being torn down. And they're like, oh, we like this. I'm like, not going to be there anymore.
Right. Yeah.
But I never wanted to ruin it for anybody. And so I was very much on that's going to be cool stuff. Or when people say, oh, I work for, that they were like, oh, where do you work in Disney? I'm like, oh, I work in, the building that looks like a cruise line. And they're like, oh, okay. Yeah. Like, yeah. Or when I was at parks and stuff, it was always fun. I mean, I think that we should be able to hold on to that magic as much as we can. Same thing like when I go to Renaissance festivals and I see people not breaking characters and then like Taste the King's salty nuts. And they're selling and I'm going, I really want those sugar and cinnamon almonds. And they're like, Taste the King's salty nut. I'm like, all right. I become a British accent and whatever it is that I'm wearing. Huzzah, yeah. But it's fun. I'm glad. That's good. So you do not like snow sports, winter sports, and snowboarding. That's the lie.
Correct. Like our house, we keep it at 74. And even then I actually have a heated blanket on right now. So medically, I have MS and arthritis. I've had arthritis since I was 15. And so it's like my joints get really stiff and I have Raynaud's syndrome. So I don't get very good circulation to my hands. So I have like heated blankets pretty much in every room. I have heated hand gloves. I learned this from going to Simple that I needed heated hand gloves and heated socks because they keep the convention rooms very, very cold.
Yes.
And at one point I was like, okay, I need to go to the bathroom. I took off my socks and my feet were like purple and blue. And I was like, oh, dang it, I have to go run up and put my feet in a hot, shower before I lose a toe. And so I can't actually do winter sports or any of that. So I longingly watch people sled.
Yeah, I always wanted to do like skating like on ice, but again, Florida girl.
Yeah. I'm a Chihuahua. I can't handle it.
Oh, yeah. But it is true. The convention spaces, because of the volume of people, the only way to keep it at a quote unquote normal, decent temperature is to crank that, puppy up and make it cold as hell. And some of us are a little bit more sensitive to some of that. We're going, yeah. In fact, I was looking because I'm going to be heading over to Denver for Readers Take Denver in a few weeks. And I'm going, what blanket am I packing?
Right?
Yeah. I'm like, because you never know. So that's cool. So another game that we love to do with guests comes from so for our Patreons, we have a couple different segments that they get extra goodies and exclusive. And one of them is like a round of Would You Rather, where I, in a very loving and adoring way, make you pick between two things. And which I always get the dirty look of like, that. I'm like, one, it's for fun. And one of the questions has always been, like, would you rather tell everyone your guilty pleasures or never partake in any of your guilty pleasures again? And then the answer is either, yeah, you do, or no, you don't. That's it. I mean, I don't go into more details. And that's always also been like the running joke that we're like, okay, well, the next time you come back to the show, we'll talk about what those guilty pleasures are. And not really ever do. But I'm like, you know what? We're going to have more fun here at Enchantress After Dark. And we're going to be like, okay, so would you rather? And so that's going to be one of our games where, we have that conversation of like, if you would have to rather tell everyone your guilty pleasures or never partake in them again. And then we'll kind of go into the one way or the other. So which one would you rather do? Tell or not?
Oh, definitely tell, just because I normally have one of those personalities where I accidentally say too much anyways. And people are like, oversharing much. And for me, it's like, if it's my guilty pleasure, it brings me joy. I'm definitely not going to give it up.
So what are your guilty pleasures?
So the ones I picked for today were food, definitely food. Like people, like my husband will be like, you look so deep in thought. What are you thinking about? And I'm like, I'm wondering if I could put like deep fried mac and cheese on a burger, like, would that be good? And he's like, really? That's what you're thinking about? I'm like, yeah, no, really. Like most of the time I am thinking about different ways to eat food or like what I want to make next. And it's just like this constant food makes me so happy. Every time I'm eating, and my daughter has it too, we actually kind of start humming and our feet kind of kick.
Aww.
Yeah. And so it's just like one of those things where our food makes me so, so happy that that's one of my guilty pleasures.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always thinking, there's a video of me at one of the cons where I'm a happy drunk.
Uh-huh.
It was one of those things where my plane landed. I didn't have time to eat before I went. I'd eat at the hotel. Instead, I got there. Everyone was already there. So everyone's like, let's go karaoke. Yeah. So we go to this biker bar. It's an actual biker bar and has a karaoke corner. Nobody knew that at the time. So we get there and 4 or 5 tequila shots in. We are singing Backstreet Boys with a bunch of bikers.
Oh my gosh.
And they had always brought out the drinks we ordered right away. Like right away, you have your drinks. Very fast service. But the food, it was like an hour and a half in, and I still had not gotten my garlic fries that I ordered. And I hadn't had a chance to eat all day long because it was just a busy schedule. So here I am, absolutely wasted on tequila, singing karaoke. And there's a video of me dancing with my garlic fries when they delivered them because I was so excited and happy.
I was going, okay, she's going to either be like, and kind of like sing with the food in excitement or be like, oh my God. And have just like that pure pleasure of food. See, I envy you guys sometimes for those that really love food and know what they like have those cravings for things, because I don't crave for foods. Like when I'm the worst person to have that, like, what do you want for dinner? Conversations, because I don't crave. Like usually the answer is based off of craving. Oh, like, oh yeah, I was craving XYZ, so let's do that. But I don't have cravings very rarely. And when I do, they're more sentimental or comfort. Like I was having a bad day, so I just want to have like rice and a fried egg over rice. For me, that's just comfort kind of a thing. Pizza's easy. And others can choose it. Right. Yeah, stuff like that. And then very rarely I'm like, oh, like last night for dinner, I was kind of having a craving in the sense of a comfort food too. And my dinner became a third of a cup of ice cream, a third of a cup of coffee with like a quarter of a cup of milk and chocolate chip ice cream dunked into that, like a shake of sorts, but like
Yum.
a milkshake, but not really because I didn't mix it. And it was just like scoops up.
It's like a grown-up root beer.
Yeah,
float.
Exactly. Minus the root beer part because I don't like root beer. But yeah, it's just coffee and milk and then the ice cream. But that was kind of like sometimes our desserts growing up. And even that sometimes was lunch if you wanted it, or dinner and stuff. So that's what I had for dinner, folks. Adulting means you can do whatever you want. Okay. Don't come at me.
Exactly.
But yeah, I love it. I would love to cook for you. See, that's also where the difference is because you love it so much. And to me, that brings me joy and pleasure seeing you happy. And so I'd be like, oh, what do you want to cook? I'm like, wait, what do you want me to cook? I'm like, and just make it for you. So that's where, a different love languages lie. But yeah, that'll be fun. So food, but people always think that these guilty pleasures are going to be more of the sexual nature. And I'm like, yeah, no, I know people. It's going to be like foods and hobbies and being able to go to Renaissance festivals all dressed up, having 15 different outfits like other people I know.
Yeah.
The Renaissance festivals and things like that. But yeah, so
you have your like wardrobe.
Yeah, I ended up having to buy a Tupperware. So my husband's the one that loves the Renaissance festivals. I'm fine with going like in like jean shorts and a t-shirt or, and like that. He needs to go dressed up. In the years that we've been together for 22 plus years, I've acquired a couple of outfits, pieces here and there. So now I actually have a Tupperware that includes different skirts and different dresses and tops and corsets and belts and whatnot. So I get to like, okay, which fancy one I'm going to wear today? I'm like, nah, I'm going to be dragging on the mud. I'm just going to wear the black one.
I still haven't been able to get my husband to like fully dress up. He said he dressed up this year and I didn't get it for the longest time. So we're walking around. Someone's like, oh, you're the only one in your family not dressed up. And he goes, no, I am dressed up. And he opens like his little shirt. And he wore a t-shirt underneath that says, I'm a grumpy, angry unicorn.
Oh.
And I was like, oh, so you dressed up. Cool.
See, for him, for someone that doesn't it's not a whole lot about dressing up, having like one of those white, cotton shirts that are a little bit loose.
Oh, yeah.
That you could kind of dress it up and be a bit of a pirate or a Renaissance kind of thing. And just some black slacks or really dark black jeans tends to work, and some hiking boots or some just regular boots. And he's done. He's semi there.
He can go as Thackeray Beans.
Yeah, exactly. And then if he wants to add a vest and, or then like, okay, what's your favorite sword from which video game is how sometimes I've gotten other people to come dressed up and they're like, oh, I love it. And like grab it and things like that. So there's ways to go about it. The other thing that has happened to me in these, it's been like 12, 15 years I've been doing this, but for the podcast and the series, it's been 10. Is sometimes the guest goes rogue on me and they start asking me questions. And I'm like, nope, no one wants to know anything about me. It's not about me. It's about you guys. But it's happened enough that I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to give you guys a chance and the opportunity. I'm going to ask, do you guys have any questions for me? And then kind of make it that if you don't, we'll move on. If you do, we'll talk. So did you have any questions for me about anything?
Yeah. Okay. So my curiosity is always like, on your FYP, what are some things that you've come across that are completely not something that you've like searched for, but all of a sudden have like fallen down the rabbit hole? For example, like I discovered TikTok taverns, like where you get to watch like an old fashioned tavern and they make food or drinks. And I was like, what is happening? And it was epic. So do you have anything that's like almost like a guilty pleasure, but more like a TikTok FYP fascination or any social media?
Well, it's a funny thing because there's sometimes things that I have looked for, or because again, the algorithm is very interesting in good and bad ways, right? There's been some like do-it-yourself home projects, but based off of like witchy aesthetics. Ooh. And there was one that I was like, she was literally watching Outlander, and in one of the series, they're in this, earlier on in the season, and it was like very earthy, greeny, like green, kind of like, because again, medicine back then was just based on the herbs and the medicine and stuff like that. And it was this dark green, and they redid that whole like living area and kitchen and to make it mirroring to that, but usable for what it was. And I'd never thought that I would like that color. And I'm going, I like that color. I'm like, ooh, where can we put that in my house? So those are like the mixture of, I wish I was more handy. And I also kind of wish that my husband was a bit more handy to be able to do some of these do-it-yourself projects at home. But my Pinterest boards are nice.
Oh, yeah.
With shows, and I'm like, I need to have a local friend that's handy. I will, feed you. You do things at my house, kind of a, exchange, but a very, very much a witchy aesthetics of stuff like that. The other thing too is I'm trying to get the hints where I'm like, okay, I get it. The universe throwing things at you sometimes, where I'm really good at providing everyone else with ideas and business and stuff like that. I suck at it myself for me. And I think that that's just normal. That's always said that, the cobbler's kids don't have good shoes or stuff like that, or the doctor's always sick and things like that. So a lot of the stuff I've been finding have come across the one in particular account, which I love, and I've been sending it to friends, is not second guessing me in the sense of like what I offer as services or stuff like that. And it's the way that she does it is fantastic, because she's like, listen, and then she's like, watch this, and she'll show you something. Then you're going, what the fuck? And in one case was like, there was somebody that was doing a video about how a couple sent her their pubic hair to add to the rings. They were going to be getting like, I guess, married or something like that, or couples rings. Then there's something else about cutting poop and stuff like that. And basically her whole thought was, someone thought this up as a business, went ahead and told people about it, and people are buying the product, regardless of what that product is. Go do you.
Right.
Stop second guessing yourself. And I'm going, well, mine's, I think, is a lot better considering I'm helping people with their careers, not doing anything with pubic hair.
Well, it's so funny when you said that. Like, have you ever watched those videos where they put pottery into kilns and they'll throw hair and like leaves, and it burns so fast that it like etches a picture on the mug? And I was like picturing, because they'll actually take hair from people they love, like head hair, throw it in the kiln on this like pot, and then it makes this like almost lightning strike etching across the thing. And I was like, you married mugs where you throw each other's pubic hairs into the kiln and it leaves etched marks on there. It could be kind of like a Megan Fox thing.
No, I did see one where it was someone that was doing something. They were creating something like a pottery of sets, like a jar or something, like a mug of things. And there was a bunch of things that were given to them to include it. There were some ashes. I think they were doing with the ashes. And the person that does the role, like of the actual person that does the creation of the thing, and then the assistant. And he's like, hey, so is this thing done? And he's like, yes, it's already been done. He goes, okay, good, because the daughter's been asking about it. And the crafter was like, well, what was all this stuff about? Because there was like ashes and this and that. And basically it was, he took the person sent them the ashes of like the ex-husbands and the mothers or something like that, and the dog, which they hated the dog and they hated each other. So they have to like live eternally with each other in this. And it was like, the crafter was like, I would have never done it if I would have known. And the system was like, and this is why I didn't tell you. So these weird things sometimes hit my FYP and I'm going, okay. And I just kind of roll with it. I'll get some stuff like sea monsters and about, if you see these square patches in the ocean, get out right now, and things like that. So I'm like, it's like my playlist for music. I'm all over the place. Yep. From Vikings to like Shakira to, Beatles and then Metallica. So why not? Or Celia Cruz. And yeah, it's all fun stuff. But yeah, that's where my FYPs are.
That's awesome.
So before we go, can you tell us what you're currently working on and what's coming out next for you?
Yeah. So I'm currently working on, it's a YA book, The 12 Tasks. And so that was from the artist that first, she was the one that kind of called me to TikTok. She messaged me asking me if I could do her audiobook. And at the time I wasn't doing them. I was like, I didn't have anything set up because we just moved. And so I was like, sure. Yeah. So I reopened my studio, got it all set back up. And then she was like, okay, cool. We'll do an interview on TikTok. And I was like, I don't know what this, I kept calling it Tiki-Talkie. And my kids were like, Mom, you're so old. And so I was like, well, what do I have to do? I have to get 1,000 followers. And so then I was like, okay, well, I'm never going to go live then. And so she brought me to TikTok. And so I've been doing her series and I love it. It's like a portal fantasy with like Stargate vibes and like Lord of the Rings mixed with like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And so it's like a really fun portal fantasy for YA. And I do it because it's like my kids can listen to them, which is fun. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, I do romance books, fantasy and sci-fi romance books. As I said, the one I just put out is like an alien. She gets abducted by aliens and then they crash land on a planet. And it's a polyamorous alien romance. And then the one I'm doing up next is the Omegaverse. And so she is an Omega that gets thrown into a pack house of like 5 guys. Lots of fun. And so that's the one I'm going to be recording next. So I'm really excited about that because that one was, I read the whole series and then the author reached out to me and was like, hey, can I request you to audition for a book? That's another thing I do that's different than like doing it as a profession. I don't audition for books just because I don't have time to check out the website. And I also always forget it exists. And so authors will message me asking me to audition for their books, and then I'll set up like an audition and I'll send it to them. So that's how I've gotten all my books. So she reached out and when she messaged me, I literally like, once again, almost goat fainted. I screamed and ran around the house and then I just like couldn't even talk. My husband's like, what is going on? And so I'm so excited about that book.
Nice. And I was doing, before we started talking, I was listening to some clips and I landed on the Violet Flames.
Oh yeah.
And oh my God, you do that as a solo narration and the clip, which in this case, Audible did a really good job at selecting the clip or whoever did to put it as a sample, is having you and I believe the main character, because I haven't read the book, but I added it to my cards. The banter that you guys were having was so good, but I'm like, it's just Blanca talking. She's doing it by herself. And it was just so good. That's the first book. Do you know it's the second book? Because I'm a sucker for a series.
So it was actually due to be recorded this past summer, but me and the author were talking and she wants to move into, her other books are all dual narrated. So she wants to save up money to have some of the POV chapters because the book coming up has a lot more of Valerian's POV. And so she was like, okay, I think I'm going to get a male actor or a male narrator to do his point of view, just because doing solid chapters in male voice my voice tires out faster.
Yeah.
And so she was like, instead of ruining your voice and causing any issues, let's get a male narrator. Cause then I'd still do all the other characters. And then the male narrator would do all of like Valerian's voice.
I love that for her, but I'm also a little sad because you were doing such a good job. I loved it. I was like, oh my God, that's her.
You.
That's really just her talking literally to herself, but like 2 people.
Yeah.
It's been a while. I have like, for me, I've kind of been in a reading slump. And so the fact that I was listening to the sample and it was like, oh, okay. And just the banter, I was like, oh, okay. This is good what I'm listening to next.
Yeah. That author makes good banter. She's so good at it.
And then I also saw that there's a Kickstarter going on for
Scorching Lies.
And can you tell us a little bit about that?
I'm excited for that one too. So CM Nix, under her other pen name, is one of my favorite authors. And so I was scheduled to do one of her other books, and then this one came out, and she was like, it was it took off. And so she was like, can we switch it so that you do this book instead? And I was like, of course, absolutely. So the Omega series that I'm going to be doing next is going to be with Copper. So his name is Uncle Copper. And then his real name is Jack Hill. So we're going to be kind of debuting him as Jack Hill. And he'll also be doing Scorching Lies. And Jenny Allen has Blood Lily coming out. So those three we have scheduled together to do. And Scorching Lies is like a dark modern day mafia. Mm-hmm. And it's got more of the it's not like, for example, like the one you're mentioning with the Violet Flames. It's more of like the soulmate, and they battle bad guys, and there's not really any morally gray in the aspect of that. Like some people think of it like there's morally gray choices, but there are what I call human choices where you have to make a hard decision. Then there's like the morally gray where it's like, was that consent? And it's like, yes, because they've given each other consent unless it's like a safe word, right?
Right.
So that book's going to be a lot of fun. It's more of the darker, modern romance.
Yeah, I was looking at that. I'm like, Jack Hill. I'm like, oh, that's the guy with the accent. Yeah. Cowboy. Yes. And so I'm like, okay. I'm going, okay, I like the tone of his voice. And I've heard him do some accents. And I know that his Irish is good for the video clips. But I'm like, Blanca, you kick ass. So I'm okay, good. I'm going to probably listen to Blanca. No offense to him. But, it's a lot of people think, because they sound good. And again, not in reference to him or anything, because I don't know the man. But there's always like that conversation that's been happening lately, at least on the casting side. And I think even too sometimes from the listeners, is that there's a lot of people that sound great, for a small limited amount of time. And in audiobooks, it's about stamina. And we all like stamina, folks. Okay. This is inclusive in our audiobooks. It's one of those things where like, can they carry? And also, can they act? That's the other conversation. So I'm like, okay, when I saw that, I'm like, all right, Blanca is awesome. We're going to go support Blanca here. And
yeah, I'm a big proponent of like acting in audiobooks. Like I know there's like a space where it's reading the audiobook, but for me, I always tend to lean more towards the audiobooks that have been like performed, because I feel like if you close your eyes and it's almost like a movie, then that's more of my style that I like to listen to.
Well, I mean, like you were saying, it's how you enunciate certain things and where you put the emphasis and the reveal. Like I get it, because there's one, like I love J.R. Ward, and her books are thick. Mm-hmm. I love a big book, because I'm not going to lie about it. And her narrator, Jim, is very good at what he does. But sometimes, like I can tell when there's different characters, but he's not about that whole performance. He's much more of, I would classify him under more of a reader, which is, again, totally fine. I know that when I'm getting and picking up one of those audiobooks, that is what I'm getting, and I'm okay with it.
Right.
But, most of the other times I'm like, if the line says, and he's angry or he's happy or they're this and that, I'm like, I didn't hear that in the voice. So like, where was it? And yeah, so it's just one of those things, but I'm excited about it. I love it that authors are trying to get creative on how to get their titles in audio, and Kickstarter is a great way to do it and have people support them as the artists that they are. And then just, for me, it's like, cool. I'm going to share about it. I'm going to get it out there. And then I'm like, where's the product? Let's go.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being, taking the time to hang out with me and talk and being my guest today. It's been fun getting to know you.
Yeah. You made my very first podcast very fun. It was felt more like talking to like a friend on the phone than an interview. So that's awesome. I was
thank you. If you're not following her on social media, I will include all the links so you guys don't have to go hunting for them. And also to make sure you got the right Blanca, because, sometimes we're like, is this the right account? Right. I'm like, well, here's the link. So you don't have to worry about it. It would be over at Viviana Enchantress of Books for the page landing for this episode. And until next time, happy listenings.
Thank you to all of our Audiobook Lovin Podcast Patreon. The Audiobook Lovin Podcast has special Patreon access levels. Join today to receive benefits including early access to episodes, shout-outs, special exclusive content, and much more. Support the podcast by becoming a Patreon at www.patreon.com patreon.com/Audiobook Lovin. We thank you for your support.
Thank you for joining us on the Audiobook Lovin Podcast, hosted by Viviana, Enchantress of Books. For links and more information discussed in today's episode, previous podcasts, or the Audiobook Lovin Series, please visit our website, vivianaenchantressofbooks.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a positive review wherever you listen to our podcast. Until next time, happy listening.